Okay, so we're gonna get the meeting started if everyone is ready. Can I get a verbal confirmation from everyone, or type in the chat that y'all are here and ready to start?
I'm here.
Is everyone else good?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So we're just gonna start then. So, through the spreadsheet, we kind of took account of everything that everyone was wanting to work on, and there was some that asked for how to start a resolution, which is really important. So when starting a resolution, when you first look at the resolution, you want to brainstorm with your partner about all the potential arguments, make a list. If you don't have previous topic knowledge, then you can skip right to the research. But it's important to make a list of all the arguments you're trying to cover for the topic. And remember, when you're researching, to cut cards for every statistic, argument, or background information that seems important. Because it's really, really hard later on if you're in a debate round and you know this statistic or this like fact and you say it on the card afterwards. So just remember to organize your prep so that everything you read while you research, you have a way to find it later. For research tips, we're going to go really fast through this. Go past the first page on Google and Google the topic area plus another generic term. For example, UNCLOS in terrorism, UNCLOS in military, UNCLOS in the economy. Just searching UNCLOS in the environment might lead you to articles about the Arctic, oil, drilling in general, pollution, clauses in UNCLOS, overfishing caused by UNCLOS, etc. So just brainstorm more about the specific argument areas and use the keywords from that to search the topic area to get more information. It also makes numbered warranting easy. Second, find studies by adding PDF to the end of your query, using Google Scholar, finding press releases of the study on Google News, and finding a hyperlink to the actual study. Good IR journals, International Studies Quarterly, Foreign Affairs, World Politics, Foreign Policy. These are all very good. And you can use these for not just debate, but school research as well. They're just good research tips in general. Sabine, do you want to cover this slide?
Okay, sure. So once you've started doing a little bit of research on a resolution, it's also a good idea to look for backfiles. Backfiles are basically just the research that's been compiled by other debaters over time. So it's usually, there's a lot of stuff that's for policy debaters that is available for you to access online. So if you know that there's like a really generic topic area that's going to be covered on the resolution, for example, like there's a resolution that's political and there's going to be something about war, then it's probably a good idea to look at some backfiles that have generic evidence that just like this war scenario will happen or won't happen, because it saves you a lot of time when that research and literature has already been like put into a carded format for you. And then the other things to look at are to consider the different biases of the sources that you're looking at, because if it's really obvious on a topic that one side is like one political ideal and the other side is the other political ideal, then you can narrow down some of your search options by just looking at specific websites. For example, if you're doing an economic topic, usually whatever like economic policy is being proposed by the resolution will be really obviously towards one political ideal. And so then you can, when you're on AF, look at sources that are from that political side, and if you're on neg, look at the other sources. When you're looking up evidence and stuff for starting your research, pay attention to the kind of evidence that you're looking for, because it can be helpful when you're on different websites to consider what you might be looking for as you read the article. So if you're looking for evidence for your links, it's usually easier to find it in news articles, just because news articles are going to have like warranted explanations to convey a narrative of why it is that current events are happening the way they're happening. And it will be easier for your judges to understand and it's like less dense, but it will still have enough nuance to give you link evidence. But if you're looking for impact evidence, it's usually a lot easier to find it in studies or journal articles because they're usually focused on statistics, and most impacts have some statistical warranting behind them. And also because empirical studies are going to be a lot more convincing, because if you can show that your impact is actually materialized in the past, that's going to be a lot more convincing than a news article that's just based on rhetoric.
Okay. Before we move on to round organization, Nicole wanted y'all to know that the resolution changed from sub-Saharan Africa to West Africa. So the new area is West Africa, not sub-Saharan Africa. So just a quick review, round organization, there's 3 minutes of prep time, 4-minute constructive speech, 4-minute rebuttal speech, 3-minute summary speech, and 2-minute final focus. There's crossfire between constructive and a rebuttal. There's crossfire between rebuttal and summary, and there's grand crossfire between summary and final focus. Crossfire will always be 3 minutes long. Okay, Sabine, rebuttal.
Okay, so in rebuttal, your rebuttal is 4 minutes long, and the basic goals are to respond to your opponent's case, and then if you're the second speaking team, then you want to respond to their rebuttals by frontlining, and you especially want to pay attention to turns because you're not going to have the opportunity to really frontline later, and if it's a turn, then they could potentially win off of it. So what's important about rebuttal is it's not just about reading pre-written blocks that you'll have prepared against important arguments. It's also about being able to come up with analytic responses. So when you're trying to think of a new response to something you've never heard before, it's helpful that while you are listening to their case, you can write down notes for yourself. So if you hear something and you kind of think, what, that doesn't make very much sense, then it's a good idea to circle it for later, because when you have your prep time or while you're listening during crossfire, you can think more about it. And you want to make sure that you can find the weakest components of any argument, because every argument can be broken down into pieces. So if you can break it down into here's the uniqueness and here's the link and then here's the impact, it's usually easier to highlight, oh, like this impact doesn't really make sense, or this impact isn't really that important because it's not very big. And then you can kind of point out those flaws in your speech. So it's helpful to ask a lot during first crossfire. So you have to communicate with your partner, like, what is it that I need to know about this argument in order to have a more effective rebuttal? And that's also important when you hear a new argument that you've never heard before and you need to make quick responses, to call for the evidence that sounds the most important or like the most sketchy, because you're more likely to be able to find holes in the argument if you can read the actual original evidence. And then you just want to overall respond to it as effectively as you can, but don't stress out too much over hearing a new argument, because that's kind of the point of the new arguments, is to catch you off guard. And if you stress too much about it, then you probably won't be as effective responding. So you just have to think of it the way you would think of any other argument and look at the different components that make it up. When you're giving an effective rebuttal, then you should be going down the flow in a really easy to understand way. And it's a lot easier if you rely on a basic structure of having starter phrases like start on their first contention, or we have 2 responses, and then numbering your responses, than it is to rely on just having this kind of narrative rhetoric point that causes a lot of verbal fillers. If you have structure because you know what order and what you're organizing your speech to look like, then it's going to be a lot easier for you if you feel like you're going to trip up at some point during your speech. Rebuttal, it's important that you cover as much ground as possible, because later it's going to be harder to respond to things that you didn't cover during rebuttal. And so if you want to get more coverage, but you feel like there's just too much and you can't respond to it all at once, then you can strategically group arguments. So when you hear a specific argument, you can characterize how it's similar to another, and then you can respond to them all at once. And then the other really important part of rebuttal is, if you want to be more effectively set up for later in the round, you're going to need to interact as obviously as possible with their arguments. So before you respond respond to an argument, not just to give the judge context as to where you are looking at on your flow and what kind of argument you're responding to, but also to explain how you're interacting with their argumentation. You need to re-explain their argument and then give your response to it, because otherwise you'll just have a bunch of responses kind of floating around attached to things, but there isn't an implication as to why your responses matter.
We're pausing right here. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to open mic or type in the chat.
Will we have access to these slides as well?
Yes, I can post the slides into the Teams after the meeting. And it's also recorded, so we'll also have the recording in there.
Okay.
For the other question in the chat, wasn't Final Focus 3 minutes during school year? Final Focus has always been 2 minutes. I
think in like, it depends on the tournament you go to. I think, because I have seen some middle school tournaments that had 3-minute Final Focuses, but in general, like most of the debate community, it's 2 minutes. So I think it just depends on who is hosting the tournament.
Yeah. And for all of you like 8th graders, if you're going to 9th grade, I don't think we've ever encountered like a single high school debate tournament that had 3-minute Final Focuses. So it's better to practice just now with like 2-minute Final Focuses. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, cool. So summary is now 3 minutes, and the basic things to do is to collapse, meaning you pick an argument. Say you have 2 contentions, you pick one of your contentions to go for, and you really, really want to crystallize during summary. Crystallizing doesn't just mean re-explaining the entire round. It's to reconstruct the round so you have a clear narrative that makes the judge want to vote for you. What this entails is it's actually very structured. So first you want to frontline and extend your case. Frontlining is just responding to the arguments made on your case, and you always want to prioritize this first because it's offense. I don't know if you guys learned about offense versus defense, but offense is arguments or points why the judge should vote for you. Defense is points why the judge shouldn't be voting for your opponent. But remember, for the judge to have a reason to vote for you, at the end of the day, you always need offense, because not voting for your opponent doesn't make a very clear reason why the judge should vote for you. So you always want to be putting offense first. And extensions on the case, you want it to be like uniqueness, link, warrant, and impact. You don't need to have a very extensive extension. You can practice it so it's like 15 seconds or 10 seconds or even 5 seconds. You want to extend what makes sense, basically. So you want to look for important cards, like for example, Smith 19 explains. But you definitely want the warrant and the impact in there. And you want to clear up any responses or doubt your opponent puts on your case. So make sure you have the argument interaction and the warranting in place. So a lot of what happens, especially in rounds, is that you want to just say your impact and then weigh and then respond to the argument that your opponent puts on yours, but you don't explain your entire contention again to the judge in a clear, concise way, so the judge don't have that clear narrative. So remember, at the end of the day, the summary really needs to go for like a clear narrative. And then you want to extend your arguments from rebuttals on your opponent's case, which is defense. Since summary is now 3 minutes, defense is pretty necessary in summary. Of course, if your first summary, you don't know what offense your opponents are going to go for, but that's why you want to extend terminal defense. Terminal defense means an argument that takes out completely your opponent's argument. And you need to be able to identify what is terminal defense and what is not. It's kind of hard to like explain if you don't have like an example, but what it's supposed to be is that this one argument can take out your entire opponent's, which might look like a turn, which might look like a D-link, or a non-unique. But in Washington, also, it's important not to drop any arguments. If you're going to like go to like the NAT circuit, it's a different scenario. But in Washington, remember just to extend like a couple of important responses on each of your opponent's arguments. Like if they talk about a turn, remember to extend defense on the turn as well. If they have two contentions, just extend like one or two responses on each contention if your first summary. If your second summary and they collapse, you don't need to extend defense on the stuff they drop, but make sure you extend defense on the stuff they do go for. And last but not least, this is like the most important part of summary, is weighing. You can weigh in magnitude, which includes scope and severity. Scope is just like how big is it? Severity is how I guess severe or detrimental it is. Like for example, like if we're impacting to the same amount of lives and yours is, for example, like hurting education, but mine is like directly deaths, you can say that mine is more severe because like living is a prerequisite to like getting education. Time frame is another way of weighing. So this includes like reversibility. Reversibility really is important when it's stuff for like climate change, because the impacts are irreversible. And then there's long-term versus short-term. So this works both, like this can be good or bad for you. You can say that if my impact manifests in the short term, then you have to vote for me first. But if they say that like, you know, my impact is like showing in the long term, it lasts for a longer period of time, then you might want to vote for me instead. And then there's prerequisite, which means that one impact comes before another or causes the other to happen. And prerequisites are really what you want to be thinking of, because that's a way of like meta weighing that has a deeper level of argument interaction. If you're just weighing on scope or severity, you're taking your impact and the statistics or the numbers at very face value, but prerequisite is very, very good in weighing and saying that if my impact causes the other to happen, you kind of like turn their entire case basically. And then the last way to weigh is probability, which is just likelihood. Probability is important in it mitigates it, but it doesn't show why like you shouldn't vote for something entirely. So you probably shouldn't just weigh on probability, but it's definitely good if you're going against big scary impacts like climate change, specifically solving for climate change. Like your opponent might make a lot of arguments about why like climate change is so bad, but you need to like defend yourself on if they can really prove solvency to climate change. And probability is also really important when you're coming in face with like war, or specifically like nuclear war. So in terms of like structure, organization, and time allocation, there's no specific like guideline to how you should do it. Some people prefer to weigh at the top, but for relatively like novices to like even first or second years, I would suggest going offense first, weighing, and then defense, but make sure you do allocate the time to specifically weigh, or else it's very easy to forget about weighing. And weighing is really like the only way that you make it easy for the judge to vote for you. Because you might think like an impact is really important and you don't explain like why it's important. The judge might think a different way, because the judge might believe that, you know, probability is more important than severity. So make sure you make that argument. And if your opponent makes a like weighing argument, make sure you respond to that too. So just don't make your own weighing argument and ignore why your opponent's weighing argument shouldn't matter over yours.
Hi. So I have to go to gymnastics, so I gotta go right now. So bye.
Bye. This is just like more advanced. I don't know if you guys learned to this point yet, but I'll just go really quickly through it. The first is like argument selection, how you select which arguments you want to go for. Path of least resistance. It's literally like if I have 5 responses, put on my first contention, and I have 2 responses, put on my second contention. It's just easier to go for your second contention, and make sure you keep your like aware of turns, and then you want to think about argument interaction. Like maybe I have like one contention that's like relatively clear, but there's so little like it matters so little to the round and to like the whole round narrative that I might just go for my second contention instead. And then frontlining, make sure you prepare beforehand. And if there's a lot of arguments, make sure to group. And you can also put spikes in case. I can go over that later if you guys don't know what it is or are wondering what it is. And then third is extensions, like practice summarizing the argument. We can do some drills for it later if we have time. And then weighing, this is just more like advanced stuff, which is like weighing the arguments, not just impact, which is like meta weighing. Scenarios interact. You can break it down to weigh at the link level and the impact level. And also remember to use like rhetoric because weighing is subjective and use it as a crutch. And a lot of people tend to use buzzwords for weighing, but they're not actually all that helpful. So just keep like rhetoric in mind when you're giving summary because this is like the one part of the round where it completely goes off script.
You just muted yourself, by the way.
Yeah, Sabine is.
Okay, so final focus is 2 minutes. Like we said, for some middle school tournaments, it might be three minutes, but usually in most contexts, especially in the high school context, it's 2 minutes. The basic point of final focus is to kind of follow what the summary does. So you want to extend your arguments again, and you do it essentially the same way that the summary did, by extending each part of the argument and explaining how it's still valid. And then you also want to focus on weighing, and you beyond just weighing, you want to do what's called meta weighing, which is explaining why the way that you've chosen to weigh the round is preferable to the way that your opponent has. So you, for example, if you're saying that your impacts are high magnitude, and so you need to vote for the impact that affects the most people, you should also explain why magnitude is more important than, say, probability, because maybe your opponents have argued that their impact is more probable, so it's easier to vote for. And then you would explain, oh, like magnitude holds more relevance than probability because if there's a chance of impacting a large number of people, then that's still more important than if there's a really high chance of impacting a small number of people. And then the other things that you want to do in final focus is extend the frontlining that was done in summary. So you want to continue to explain why the responses that your opponents are explaining against your case are invalid, and you can do this as a part of the extensions that you do on your own case. So as you explain why your arguments are true, you can also explain why the arguments they've made in response are false, for a faster and more efficient way of clearing up kind of how the round has gone. And then the last thing that you want to do is extend anything on their case that will prevent them from winning the round, and you need to really pick the smallest number of weight or smallest amount of defense to extend usually, but you still need to explain why whatever defense you're extending is so detrimental to their arguments. In final focus, the most important thing to pay attention to, especially when you're doing practice rounds, is timing, because it is shorter than other speeches. Even if it's 3 minutes, it's still quite short in comparison to the other speeches. For example, in rebuttal, it's okay if you go a little bit top heavy, if you spend a little bit too long on the first things that you discuss. But in final focus, that can become really difficult and can prevent prevent you from winning the round, especially when it's only 2 minutes. So you have to assume that you will spend more time on whatever you start on, even if you think that you will be able to prevent yourself from doing so. So that's why I would recommend starting by either weighing or extending your own case, because it's more important that you're winning your own arguments than it is that your opponents aren't necessarily like winning theirs. And then it's easier after that if you go on to their case. I also think it's just more effective to start a little bit stronger by explaining why your arguments are true. There are some instances, though, where if you're the second speaking team, especially if you have a lay judge, it can be pretty persuasive to end on here's more reasons why you should vote for us, as opposed to here's more reasons why you shouldn't vote for them. But I think at the end of the day, it's just an easier and safer option to start with your own arguments. So compared to summary, a few things you should keep in mind is your final focus should essentially contain all of the basic ingredients that the summary had. It shouldn't stray too far from whatever narrative your summary has had. Especially as you move into more advanced forms of debate, it's important to keep in mind that the summary and the final focus should have parallelism. So anything that wasn't said in the summary shouldn't be in the final focus, with the exception of weighing, because you can bring up newer or you can expand on whatever weighing arguments were already in summary and final focus. And that's one of the differences, is that final focus should definitely have a lot more weighing than summary does. Summary is going to be primarily focused on explaining and really crystallizing whatever arguments you've brought up prior to, like in your case. But the overall goal in final focus is to get the judge to vote for you by framing the round and explaining how they should think about their ballot and how that they should perceive like all of the different arguments and why all of them matter. So this goes along with weighing and the line-by-line responses that you give, but it's also just an entirely different part of the speech than the other speeches would have, because you have to really explain, like, they've brought up several points during this round, but they haven't responded to these overall points.
Okay, sorry, my thing had a problem. Very good, don't worry. Okay, so we're gonna do drills. I'll post the PowerPoint in here, but this is like a document compiled by NDF, which is like good for drills. So we have a couple of drills. I'm just gonna go through all of them and explain what they are, and we have like 25 minutes left, and then you guys can pick whatever drill you want to do. But also these drills you can do on your own with your partner, so they're very helpful. So for starting a resolution, you can practice fun short debates. You can use a new resolution, preferably not too complicated. For example, like resolved, it's in humanity's best interest to stop seeking contact with aliens, and debate it within like an hour. Use 30 to 45 minutes to research and write a case and responses. Don't give yourself more than 45 minutes max. You can work in teams of 2 to 3, so basically like your normal partnership. And you have a debate at the end of like the 30 to 45 minute, and you use a normal debate structure. And the goal of this drill is to focus on using analytics, logic, organized prep, and research time. And you want to work on breaking down a resolution and brainstorming and good methods of research. Word economy. So for all of you guys who wanted to work on word economy, condensation drills are actually very important. There's 2 different ways you can work around it. Directions is, for the first one, is to do redos while cutting down the time significantly. So say you give a summary, right? It should go from 3 minutes to 1 minute 30 or below. Ideally, final focus should go from 2 minutes to 1 minute or below. So how you can do this is you can take like small parts, like small arguments, and you cut them down individually, and then you get the overall down. So it's easier to understand your summary and word economy that way. The goal is to not go faster. When you're cutting it down, don't increase your speed. Focus on being more efficient with wording and using fewer filler words. The second way you can do a condensation drill is read a 4-minute case. Practice extending the entire case in its entirety, meaning like uniqueness, link, warranting, and impact in 2 minutes 45 seconds. Don't drop any warrants and pick and choose which pieces of evidence you'd like to extend. So the important cards point we talked about earlier would be really important in here. And the goal is to have strategic evidence selection, making sure you have uniqueness, link, internal link to impact, not going faster, and increasing efficiency and fewer filler words. For rebuttal, analytic rebuttals are very important. The directions is just to read a case, preferably one on a topic you have never debated before, prep for 3 to 4 minutes, and give a logical rebuttals using no cards or statistics. Don't worry if it sounds sketchy, like if it's logical to you based on your past knowledge or just pure logic, then that's the whole point of the exercise. It's especially good for practicing how to keep composure and how to think on your feet, especially when you hit arguments you've never thought about before. This might be kind of a stressful drill depending on, I guess, your personality and your experience within speech and debate, but it's really helpful. And the goal is to have each person read at least one of the each type of response, a D-link, a non-unique, a disadvantage, link turn, impact turn, or mitigation. Type in the chat or like just open mic if you don't understand what any of like the argument types just mentioned is. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Meanwhile, you can type in chat. For summary and final focus drills, speech redos are really, really important. You should really be doing redos at each tournament or after each practice debate. So there's like 2 versions of doing this. Version 1 is after giving a speech, take as much prep time as needed, look over your flow, and give a new speech in the same allowed time as your redo. So like if summary was 3 minutes, you gave a 3-minute summary speech, your redo should also be 3 minutes, but you can take as much prep time as you need. Remember to use the timer so you can see like how much time am I taking to extend case? How much time am I taking to weigh? The goal is to work on time allocation, better, cleaner extensions, weighing, picking arguments, structure, and logic. The version 2 is to record your speech. Type it out verbatim, like word for word, include the verbal fillers, like the yeah, and you write then a new speech replacing the old one. You type out the speech and try to get as close to perfection as you can. Think about the organization, which extensions you're going for, how you want to phrase it, stuff like that. Then you read the new speech in allotted time and read it as many times as you need to feel comfortable with it and make it sound pretty, basically. The goal is to work on word economy, verbal fillers, rhetoric, presentation, and content. Both of these versions of redos are pretty effective and they're really good for working on summary and final focus, but you can also do them for rebuttal or just reading case if you're trying to make it sound better. Weighing, there's impact debates. Usually for weighing, you want to just include it in like the redos, but if you want to work on like large scale weighing, you can do impact debates where you pick an impact or be given an impact, like for example, climate change or space exploration. You weigh it against another person's impact, like for example, racism in a small debate, using weighing mechanisms and prereqs on link, impact level, basic and meta weighing. The goal is to understand better how impacts and arguments interact and how to promote one over the another. Last but not least, crossfire. You can do crossfire round robin or like man versus machine. The first one, you have 2 people read a case and then crossfire each other on it. The third person acts as the judge and votes for the person who best develops strategy for later in the round and asks the best questions. This drill should also be used for after rebuttal, summary, and final focus. The goal is to develop asking strategic questions. The second type is have one person read a case, the other person question the case reader for 5 minutes. The person questioning should ask questions, ask silly questions, be rude, etc. Qualities of bad crossfire. The person answering should practice answering the questions in a clear and concise and composed manner. So the goal is to practice maintaining demeanor in stressful situations and also practice defending their case. I believe that's it for drills. Yeah. So we can break out into like first speaker, second speaker rooms, and we can work on like any of the drills or any further questions you have or just anything you need help with, if that's good with everyone. Okay. I'll take that as everyone's okay with it. I'm a first speaker, Sabine's a second speaker. So, oh, Hannah's also here, right? And Evan. Okay, so we have 2 first speakers and 2 second speakers. We'll organize the rooms so that like, I'll go into room 1, Evan can go into room 2, Sabine can go into room 3, and Hannah can go into room 4.
Wait, why do we need so many rooms?
I don't know. I feel like it's easier to talk to people if you have less people to talk to.
Wait,
I
but
feel like it's a one-on-one. It's like super awkward if you.
Yeah,
Is
I
it?
think it should. I think we should just do like.
Yeah,
But
I think
I thought we
make
were
it
doing
like
drills. I thought we were doing drills.
We
We could
are.
probably just split into like first and second and not have 4 rooms.
Okay, sure.
thought
We
we
can
were talking
split
about-
later if we need. Okay.
we could do partners. And then like one group goes into each thing because they're gonna be working together in rounds anyways.
That works
How
too.
many pairs
Yeah.
do we have?
I don't think that we have enough like people to instruct like just one partnership at a time.
I mean, we only have like 1, 2, 3.
Wait,
Yeah.
I think we have 4 teams because there's 4 of us and there's 8.
Yeah. So I think we can do.
We could
So
do
if
that.
your partner, Vishnu, wait, are you the only person whose partner isn't here? So like, do we have four groups basically? Okay, so yeah, we can do that. So I'll go into room 1. Evan, can you go into room 2? Sabine can go into room 3. Hannah can go into room 4.
Wait, but like if we were going to work on like individual speakers and then just one speaking type or position is in like each room, but there's partners going into their rooms. That's why I was saying like it would have to be a partner instructors.
Okay. Okay, what do you guys want to work on? Do you guys just want help with like your what you're working on as a partnership, or do you guys want to work on individual speaker skills? Okay, individual speaker skills. I'd recommend the ladder. Evan, do you want to go into room 1 together, and then Sabine and Hannah can just go into room 2, and then everyone just go into their rooms based on your first or second speaker. Room 1 is for first speaker, room 2 is for second speaker. Is everyone good with that?
Yep.
Okay.